With all the news of China's impressive growth in high tech manufacturing, futuristic cities, and AI, why is it that the prosperity has not been trickling down to the everyday person these last few years? Why is it that people are not getting richer like their counterparts in the US in the last 5 years at the same rate as before? If you walk into a factory floor in Hefei today, you'll see a country that has won the 21st century. It's all about the new quality productive forces AI, biotech, robotics. The data backs this up. In the first half of 2025, high tech manufacturing value added grew by 9.4%. For economy this size, that's a huge number. But that's only half the picture. While the factory sprinted retail sales, the actual spending of households, it crawled at only 0.9%. And that is the core of this paradox. We can think of the Chinese economy as a high performance engine. It's redlining, generating massive power, but the fuel lines meant to transfer the energy to the passengers, the workers, the families, these are clogged. The wealth is being trapped in the production cycle, never reaching the consumer. Usually, economic theory says that high value manufacturing leads to higher wages and more spending. But here we see the opposite. Production surges, consumer confidence hits record lows. The trickle down economic theory has broken. And to understand why, we have to look at the structural machine underneath. The first reason for this disconnect is a massive problem of scale. We have to look at the size of the hole China is trying to fill. For 20 years, the economy ran on real estate. At its peak, property and infrastructure accounted for roughly 30% of GDP. That's massive. Labor intensive engines that employed millions of people across the country. When the government dismantled this sector to stop the speculation in empty homes, it created a negative 6% drag on the entire economy. And this is a crater the size of the Grand Canyon. Now, Beijing is pointing at the three big economies EV, batteries, and solar as its replacement. These industries are booming, yes, but the math is the problem. While real estate collapsed, the three big only grew from 5.5% to 6.3% of GDP. The mismatch is undeniable. Imagine replacing the massive diesel engine of a supertanker with high tech, efficient electric motors. You have the will, but physically they cannot push the ship. The real estate hole is 6 times larger than the tech growth. This leads to a structural distortion because the old engine is gone and the new one is far too small. The government is forcing investment to compensate. Right now, household consumption in China is only 39% of GDP. Compare that to the global average, roughly 60%, or to the US, roughly 68%. On the other hand, hard investments in manufacturing is 20% higher than the global average. The entire system is engineered to pump resources into making things, not buying things. Subsidies are flowing to the factory floors and not to the family dinner tables. We're pouring success into the top of the bucket, but it leaks out before it reaches the household. So, we've established the problem. The factory is running hot, but the family is running cold. The question is, where's the money actually going? Researchers have identified three main structural leaks in the plumbing, plus a massive social barrier. The first leak: financial repression. This is effectively a hidden tax on savers. Because capital control traps your money in China and the stock market is so volatile, you're forced to keep your money in the bank. The state caps your interest rate, usually below inflation, so you earn nothing. Why? So the banks can lend the money cheaply to factories. You are subsidizing the industrial sectors with your lost interest income. In normal capital markets, industries will be borrowing at a corporate rate. Let's say it's 5% over the bank rate. But in China, the banks are taking this spread and loaning it back to the industries cheaply. This essentially takes away the potential 5% gains households could be getting if they were investing in these corporate bonds. The second leak is the fiscal architecture. China relies heavily on the value added tax, VAT, which is built on the price of goods. This is the kind of tax that hits low to medium income earners far more than high income earners, taxing everything from food to clothes. On the other hand, in China, personal income taxes are extremely low. They're underutilized. It has limited power to distribute income from high earners to the low income households. Meanwhile, local governments are essentially broke. For years, they made their money selling land to private industries for development. But with the collapse of the property sector, they're desperate for factories to produce so they can tax the production. So they're actively incentivized to build more and more for factories. To these local governments, the household costs money, while the factory makes money for them. So, despite all this talk of common prosperity, the fiscal architecture itself pushes local officials to pour concrete for industries, not to build social safety nets for families. The third leak is the SOE favoritism. There's a myth in China that the boom was created by private startups, but the data shows that the SOEs, the state owned enterprises, are 3 times more likely to get subsidies than private firms. They also get cheaper loans. The money gets trapped in these giant, inefficient state networks rather than flowing to the more dynamic private sector or to worker wages. And finally, this is where it hits the social wall, the hukou system in China. Essentially, the hukou is a way for the Chinese government to control who moves from one part of the country to another. This divides the workforce into two different castes. You have the urban insiders who have a city hukou. They have access to the city's social security nets. And then you have the migrant workers who work in the city but have none of these same rights. They're talking about hundreds of millions of people living in tier 1 and tier 2 cities like Shanghai and Beijing. These are people staffing the supply chains, driving the delivery trucks, working on the assembly lines of those EVs. But because they don't have an urban hukou, they don't get urban pensions. They don't get full access to the urban healthcare, and because they're terrified of the future, they hoard cash instead of spending it. China cannot have a consumption led economy when the system drains wealth from the households to subsidize factories and then scares workers into not spending money they have left. And finally, we come to the most underappreciated point. You might be wondering, but with all that manufacturing booming, surely the companies are making a fortune, surely there is trickle down economics, and there's money spilling over. Now, this brings us to the mood that describes China today: 内卷 or involution. Involution means intense competition with no real progress. It's about running faster just to stay in the same space. It's the race to the bottom. We see this playing out in many industries in China, especially the new three. Let's look at lithium ion batteries, for example. Last year, the production volume of batteries in China more than doubled. They made 100% more stuff, but the total value added, the money they actually made from it only grew 25%. Think about that for a second. Double the work, double the materials, but only a fraction more revenue. Why? Because prices collapsed. Solar is even worse. Solar exports went up. The total value of the industry plunged by 38%. So this is a profitless boom. I use the analogy of a movie theater. When one person stands up to see better, the person behind them stands. Eventually, everyone is standing. Nobody sees any better than before, but now everyone's legs hurt and they're exhausted. Companies are slashing prices to bleed out their competitions, and when you're in a survival mode price war, selling solar panels at a loss, you cannot afford to pay your workers more. Wage suppression becomes the only way to survive. And then there's the AI factor. We're hearing the flashy stories about massive bonuses for the top AI talent, 25 months of salary for elite engineers at JD.com, and that's real, but it's a small sliver of the workforce. AI and automation means labor light growth. In 2025, global tech layoffs hit 240,000, with a huge portion in China. We're seeing cuts in admin, HR, and data processing. The factories of the future are designed to output billions of dollars in value, but with very little humans inside. So for the average citizen, this tech boom feels like a spectator sport. They see, but they don't feel like they're getting involved. It's very different to the growth that started in the early 2000s. They watch the robots on the news, they see the glorious statistics, but their own wages are stagnant and the job security is vanishing. The wealth is getting pumped back into the machine. So while the machine is working perfectly, the market is just broken. So what's the big problem? This divergence, a working machine coupled with a broken market, leads to the single biggest risk facing the Chinese economy in 2026 and beyond: the middle income trap. This is the economic nightmare scenario. It's the glass ceiling where every country that develops enough to get out of poverty but gets stuck before it can become truly rich. It fails to make that leap. Just look at Japan and South Korea. To be considered safe to bridge the gap to a high income nation, economists are arguing that China's consumption share of GDP needs to hit 45% by 2030. Remember, it's at 39% today. If Beijing cannot fix the leaks that we just discussed, the financial repression, the regressive tax system, the hukou, and 内卷, they simply can't make it. The domestic engine isn't strong enough to carry that weight. So, what happens if they don't fix it? China will get stuck in a deflationary export model. We're already seeing the early stages of this. Because the domestic population cannot afford to buy these new EVs and solar panels, China must ship them abroad. This is the second China shock. The first shock 20 years ago was to build cheap labor producing cheap goods, toys, clothes, furniture. The second shock is different. It's built on advanced automation producing high end, cheap technology. For consumers in the West or Southeast Asia, this feels like a win win in the short term. Who doesn't want a cheaper electric car? But for the global economy, this can be destabilizing. It triggers trade wars, tariffs, and other nations trying to protect their own industries. And for China, it's a trap. The world gets cheap goods. China keeps the wage stagnation and the deflation. The factories continue to hum, but the people don't prosper. So, as investors, we're looking for the way out. Is there a way out for China? The way some experts see it, it requires three massive, politically painful pivots. First, the fiscal transfer. You have to take the wealth currently trapped in state owned enterprises and local governments and give it directly to households. We're talking about cash handouts, fully funded social security, and robust unemployment benefits. You have to stop subsidizing the factories and subsidizing the families. But this is politically difficult. It means taking power away from national champions and giving it to individuals. It is a shift from prioritizing national power to prioritizing individual well being. China has outright said they will not do this, with the retirement age far lower than Western countries. China also has an aging population. Ministers have said that they will not create a welfare state at this point in their development. It will only slow down China's progress, and unfortunately, I have very little hope for seeing this come true. The second way, service pivot. China has to aggressively move the economy towards a service led economy. Automation is killing manufacturing jobs. We can't stop that. But at this point in time, you can't easily automate a nurse, a caretaker, or a teacher. Services are labor intensive, they employ people, manufacturing is becoming labor light, and this could be a way for China to develop. With Gen Z's focus on spending money on experiences over things, this could be a potential. And thirdly, financial capital. China has to find a way to increase the wealth of its citizens without creating a bubble of speculation. Opening the capital markets, focusing on wealth in the stock market, and engineering a slow bull market will be the tide that lifts all boats. We're starting to witness the strengthening of the renminbi. Talks about an engineered slow bull market. These are the signs that we are watching for. So, what is the investor takeaway for 2026? You have to be incredibly selective. If you're betting on the Chinese consumer story, the idea that billions of people are about to start spending like Americans, be very careful. The consumer is fighting against many structural headwinds like the hukou, tax structure, and lack of safety net. But if you're betting on the industrial story, the robots, the EVs, understand that you're fighting involution, 内卷. You might pick a company with amazing technology, but they could bleed themselves dry in a brutal price war. The high tech sector is an island of efficiency in a sea of stagnation. Personally, I'm betting on the third story. China is a country that is developing the technology of the future with a long term goal of common prosperity. To pick the individual winners of the next 5 years will be a difficult task, but as long as long term investors, we want to ask, do we think China is a long term path to technological growth? And with this growth, would the lives of the everyday person get better or worse in 20 years? While some investors are trying to decide, do you bet on the machine that makes the goods or the market that is supposed to buy them, we watch for signs that allow us to bet on both. Anyway, that's how I see things from where I'm standing. Let me know what you see from your side.